Today, we're going to go over the very best sets of equipment in Rise of Kingdoms in 2026, because it has been over a year since I've updated my equipment guide and a lot has changed in the last year. In fact, not only do we have more powerful commanders in the game now, but we also have a new crystal tech system that gives you less attack, but also gives you more defense and health. So I think it's about time that I update you guys on what I'm thinking are the best sets of equipment in Rise of Kingdoms. And we'll also go over some free to play and budget friendly options, especially if you are a new player sort of working towards the end game. And of course, we'll cover all of the troop types in this video, so cavalry, infantry, archers, and we'll touch on siege, although they don't have that much wiggle room with what they can actually use. And I'm also not a siege expert, so I'll point you towards more siege focused Rise of Kingdoms creators if you really want to dive into the weeds with siege. But use the timestamps down below to jump to the troop type that you care the most about. But before we jump in, of course, what's going on, guys? Cheers. As you guys know, I'm a sponsored partnered creator with Rise of Kingdoms, so if you want more Rise of Kingdoms content, consider subscribing down below, because you guys might think you're sub, but you're actually not. Double check. And while you're down there, leave a thumbs up. All right, let's jump right in here. We're actually going to be starting with cavalry, and there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, cavalry have a very interesting budget option that's really great for the early game, and second of all, cavalry dominate the early game. And so if you're a new player, you might be most interested in budget cavalry gear, so I think this is the best place to start. Now, the reason that cavalry have an interesting budget option is because of the Vanguard set. Now, this is a green set of equipment. This piece is for your leg slot, and this piece is for your weapon slot. We have the halberd and the greaves, and this gives you a 2-piece set bonus of plus 2% cavalry attack. But on top of that, for green pieces of equipment, this gives you a tremendous amount of stats. The legs give you 5% of stats, and the weapon gives you a whopping 9% of stats. And then on top of that, when you get these special talented, you actually get a 30% increase in those stats as well. Now, that does not affect the set bonus, right? So you don't get a 30% bonus to this as well, but the actual stats here get bonuses, which is really, really nice. And again, because this is the only green set of equipment in the entire game, it's extremely free to play, budget friendly, and it's really good for the early game, because as you guys know, green pieces of equipment are one of the cheapest pieces of equipment to craft in the entire game. So with that being said, let's take a look at our first build here. Okay, so this uses both pieces of the Vanguard set, and I'm assuming that these are all special talented. Okay, so as you can see, as we turn on the special talent, your stats go up by 30% for just that one piece. Same thing with the leg piece as well. We also have a 3-piece set of windswept gear. There's actually, you can use the 4-piece windswept set. There is a windswept war helm here. This is slightly less stats overall, but it gives you 4% march speed. So if you actually want the fastest early game cavalry set, this is going to be it. But if you want the most amount of stats, you're going to use the expedition war helm instead. Okay, and every time I click this, it's going to look really awful around here, so I do apologize. Just bear with me. I'm using the battle simulator just as a template. Okay, but if you start with this set of equipment, what you're going to see is 9.5% attack, 20.5% defense, and 14% health. Now, even with the new crystal tech changes, health is still going to be your lowest stat for a vast majority of open field PvP marches. And by the way, this entire guide is mainly for open field PvP, unless I say otherwise. I don't suspect I will say otherwise. This is where you should start with your cavalry gear. From here, you would upgrade your Vanguard set to your 2 purple pieces. Okay, so we have Heart of the Saint and Gladiator, and this is going to give you more defense, more health at the expense of less attack, but overall you're going to have way more stats. Okay, from here, once you start looking into legendary pieces of equipment, you're going to be replacing your gloves with Navarre's Control, and then you're going to run a 2-piece set. So you're going to run the heavy armor of the Hellish Wasteland and the boots of the Hellish Wasteland. Okay, and you'll see here that your cavalry health is dramatically improved by getting these 3 legendary pieces. Now, let me just be clear, when you get legendary pieces, most likely they're not going to be special talented. Okay, it's very expensive to get special talented legendaries, so more than likely your stats are going to look more like this. And then you've got 2 choices. You can either go with the KVK pieces, or you can go with a Hellish Wasteland set. Now, if you do the Hellish Wasteland set, you're only going to have 4 pieces of the Hellish Wasteland, because the gloves are not, and the legs will not be. We'll talk about the legs in a second. The legs are probably one of the last pieces you really need to upgrade, although they do have good iconic stats. But if you go with the 4-piece Hellish Wasteland set, then you're going to be getting the Lance of the Hellish Wasteland and the War Helm of Hellish Wasteland, and this is going to give you not only the 3% health that you get from the 2-piece set bonus, but also the 4-piece set bonus gives you 3% counterattack damage, which in the end game is really not that necessary necessary. And then from here, you're going to go ahead and put in the Ash of the Dawn, and that's going to be your 4-piece set with 2 of the crystal key pieces that you will get over time. Okay, and this is your final build. Now the advantage of this set is that it's a little bit easier, in my opinion, to get some of these helmets and weapon blueprints because they are something that you can get from the equipment choice chests, right? And you get those from events, and so those events come around pretty regularly. On the flip side though, you have the KVK weapons and the KVK helmets, and these are a bit harder to get, but if you are consistently winning KVKs, if you happen to be so lucky or you're in a great kingdom, then they actually might be a little bit more reliable, right? You get more of them if you actually continue to win, and ultimately they are the best in slot. So if you did want to get the very best set of equipment in Rise of Kingdoms for cavalry, then this is what you would be running. You would be running the Pride of the Khan, the Sacred Dominion weapon, and you'd be running 2 pieces of the Hellish Wasteland set and the 2 crystal key pieces. And this is going to give you a nice distribution of stats. You're going to have a ton of cavalry health, a decent chunk of attack, and a little bit of defense. This is the best possible set that you can run for cavalry for a vast majority of commander pairs. And then from here, of course, you're going to work on getting your special talents for everything. That is easier said than done. Don't think that I'm just glossing over this, because that's going to take you a tremendous amount of time. But I just wanted to show you guys kind of what you would expect from end game gear that has all of this stuff here, right? You're also going to have, of course, iconic crystals in all of these pieces. I would prioritize the legs and the boots. As soon as you get them, put iconic crystals in them so you get the health stats there. Very important stuff. And that's pretty much it for cavalry. Now we're going to talk about accessories later in the video. That's going to have its own section, but now let's move on to infantry, starting with a sort of budget build. This is where we're going to start. Now I know that obviously you're going to be getting blue pieces and green pieces along the way, as you should, but just go for the ones that have the most infantry stats. I think it's pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, infantry do not have a vanguard set equivalent, right? Which is why cavalry have a really good time in the early game. They're just going to have more stats than a lot of things, but eventually this is what you're going to be working with for infantry. Okay, you'll notice we have 1 legendary piece in the form of the cloak. You get this from crystal keys. We have the gatekeeper shield, which is really nice. This gives you some infantry health, and it's only a blue piece, so we love that a lot. Unfortunately, the helmet, the witch's lineage, is going to be infantry attack, which isn't as bad as it was back in the day, now that we have a little bit less attack from crystal tech. But really, by the time you get to Season of Conquest, hopefully you're starting to replace a lot of your purple pieces. But this is what we're working with here. You'll see a nice pretty even spread between defense, health, and then a little bit less attack. Okay, now infantry, you're going to notice is the trend is they have a lot of defense. Okay, so there is unfortunately a little bit of diminishing returns there, so we'll talk more about that in a second. But from here, there's a couple of different upgrade paths that you can take, and you probably want to figure out which direction you're going to go first before you start crafting pieces. Okay, because this does change quite a bit. The first thing we'll build towards is sort of a 4-piece set that guarantees you get the 10% march speed, because in 2026 march speed is king, and that is especially true with infantry because they are historically the slowest troop type on the battlefield. Now archers are technically faster when it comes to base stats, but because a lot of their best commanders don't have march speed, they do tend to find themselves a little bit slower. That's a conversation for another video. Let's start with the 4-piece set. Okay, of course you're going to start with the boots, the gloves, and the helmet, and particularly the boots are really important to get iconic tiers on, because iconic tier 4 and 5 give you extra march speed, so that's like a huge priority, especially for infantry. And then from there you can replace your weapon with the shield of the Eternal Empire, and what this is going to do is give you a really nice spread of attack, defense, and health. Now the thing to know here is that health is from your legs, your Kurok's humility, and we will eventually be replacing this with the Eternal Knight. Okay, which again gives you a tremendous amount of defense, almost to infantry's detriment. It's actually kind of insane how little health they get from their pieces. All the health is on the lower rarity pieces, which is kind of awful, honestly. But this is a really solid set that in fact I use on my second set of infantry, and that's because again you get the 4-piece set bonus, plus you get a tremendous amount of tanky stats right with the 2 crystal key pieces here, and then eventually you're going to get a special talent on these, and you're going to have a ton of stats. Now another way to build this would actually be to use the KVK pieces, the helmet, and the weapon, and there's a couple of pros and cons here. Okay, the pros are that you're going to have much more attack and even more defense. The cons are you're losing 10% march speed, so this is incredibly good for things like rally and garrison, or your faster set of commander pairs, right? So like Sun Tzu Prime and whoever he's paired with, whether it's Liu Che, Bai Chi, William Wallace, it doesn't really matter. that's probably going to be your fastest pair, unless you're running like Liute Alex, because that's super fast as well. Basically, you would want this on your fastest set of infantry commanders. Again, this is statistically the best set that you can be running, but it will be slower. And that does matter, because in cases where you can't leave battle when you want to, you're going to trade poorly, right? And so just keep that in mind. While march speed doesn't technically change this, it does have a very real and consequential impact on the battlefield, such that some players may actually literally just prefer having less stats but move faster on the battlefield, right? However, there is a hybrid approach here, and that is running the 2 kvk pieces, the weapon and the helmet, and then running the set pieces for your chest and legs, which will continue to give you a 10% march speed bonus, and you'll get even more defense and attack from your kvk pieces. Now, this set goes way more into attack rather than defense. Unfortunately, you still have no health here. Okay, this is sort of a middle ground where statistically it's not going to be superior to the 2 kvk and 2 crystal key pieces, but it will be faster than that set. So this is more of a maximum DPS, high risk, high reward set, and whether this is effective for you or not will depend on your kvk matchups, right? So in kvk where you are winning, this is going to amplify that. You're going to be dealing even more damage, and you're going to be sticking to the target, and this is going to be the best thing that you can do. In kvks where you're losing, this will be working against you. You're going to have less defense to mitigate that damage, and so your trades are going to be a little bit worse, right? And this is why I think a lot of people do ultimately resort to running the 4-piece set with the helmet and weapon, because it gives you the tankiness to march speed ratio that you want here, and then the damage you deal is going to be just all reliant on your commanders and your armaments, right? Hopefully those are optimized to deal the most damage possible, because you're not going to get as much damage out of this. For me personally, I run 2 sets of infantry commanders, and so I have one set that looks like this and then another set that looks like this. Okay, so I can kind of balance out the march speed between the two. Most of the time one will be slower than the other, so you can balance that out. And in scenarios where I want the maximum amount of damage, I have the best in slot everything. Okay, but I did just want to mention the 4-piece set with 2 kvk pieces, because I think that this set is more viable now than it was before, now that we have a little bit less attack from crystal tech. But again, I still don't think that it necessarily finds itself as the cream of the crop best infantry gear in every single scenario on average. Next, let's move on to archers, because they also have a really interesting set of equipment here as a budget build in the form of the revival set. Now, the revival set is unlike anything we see for cavalry and infantry. They don't have purple sets of gear. Here we do see a 4-piece set in the form of your helmet, chest, gloves, and legs, and then we have the golden age as the weapon, and then the flame treads as the boots here. Okay, as you'll see, we have 19% attack, 40% defense, and 7.5% health. So really nice stuff here, nice distribution. Of course, very heavy on the defense, but archer commanders do tend to be a little bit heavier on the attack and health anyway, so this does kind of work out really nice. Now, just like with infantry, you do have a couple of upgrade path options here. The first thing we'll talk about is the 6-piece set. This is the most simple set of gear we've talked about for the end game out of any troop type, and this is literally just getting the Dragon's Breath set pieces for every single slot. Okay, and the reason that this is something that players can run is because if you do have a 6-piece set, you do get 5% extra archer health, which is a pretty nice 6-piece set bonus compared to infantry's attack and cavalry's defense. So really nice stuff here. Now, this isn't technically the best archer set in the game, but it is very simple to build because you can get every single blueprint from the choice chests. It's a guaranteed source of getting them when you do participate in things like the egg event or the archaeology event or whatever the case might be. And when compared to the best sets in the entire game for archers, it's only a little bit worse. So this isn't the worst place to end up, but there are some variations. Now, of course, we do have to talk about the 2 kvk pieces, the Hydra's Blast and the Ancestral Mask of Night. That's going to lose you the 5% bonus to your health, but it's just going to give you more stats overall. It's more attack, more defense, and of course that can scale as you do get the special talents on them, whereas the 5% health you get from the 6-piece set bonus is 5% always, no matter if you have a special talent or not. What's nice about this setup with the 4-piece set bonus is that it's 3% extra skill damage, which historically has been really good for archers and is especially true for Emperor Qin. Stacking as much skill damage on him as possible is the best way to go. Skill damage is kind of like all damage for Emperor Qin, so it is tremendously good. The other way that some players run this is actually doing a 2 kvk piece, 2 set piece, and 2 leadership pieces. Typically when they do run 2 leadership pieces, it's the legs and either the gloves or the boots. Now historically I've said that the leadership gloves are the better choice here because they replace the attack on your gloves from the set piece to defense for the leadership gloves, and then you keep the defense on the boots, and now you have a 2-piece set bonus here for leadership, which is another 3% defense, right? However, now that we get less attack from crystal tech, I do feel like it is worth noting that keeping the attack on the gloves and then getting the health from the boots instead of the defense from the boots for archers could actually be a better play now, especially because the tier 5 boots also give you an extra point of attack versus defense for the archer boots as well. So I personally would point you in this direction if you're looking for the very best set of archer gear for the open field. Then we have to talk about siege, and like I said earlier, siege are pretty straightforward because they don't have that many options, unfortunately. Now I know they have the gathering set, and so some gathering pieces can be used to great effect. They also have purple pieces that give you a nice distribution of stats here and focus more on attack. Of course, as you get a special talent here, that's going to be amplified even farther, and then eventually you're going to be working with a full legendary set of siege gear. Now again, when you first craft this, it's not all going to be talented, but you are going to get a really nice distribution of stats that is heavily focused on siege attack, which is really nice. But again, as I said earlier in the video, if you guys are looking for a much more nuanced guide for siege, I would recommend taking a look at Mr. Siege on YouTube or Dark Siege. I know there's a lot of different siege players. I know Gumbo has a YouTube channel now. I don't know if he's done a siege guide, but there are lots of great resources for siege players, and I would point you in that direction if you want a bit more of a nuanced take on what you should be doing here. But I did want to at least mention this because I know if I didn't talk about siege at all, I would get some comments asking me about siege. Fortunately, it is kind of the most straightforward troop type in my opinion, but check out those creators if you want a more nuanced breakdown of that. Now the last thing that I want to touch on here is kind of about the micro optimization of different sets of gear, right? I think probably every year approximately we see, you know, a YouTube video or a Discord discussion or a Facebook post or someone saying, oh, actually technically if you run this, it's actually the new meta, this is the new best infantry set, it's the new best archer set. And that might be true, right? And the reason for that is because as new commanders come into the game, they have different stats on their kit, right? Like Emperor Chin has 30% defense, 20% health, and we don't see any attack on his kit at all, right? And so when you compare that to what people were running before that, which was Yue Liang with Herman Prime, I don't even know, there he is, the Herman Prime has 20% attack, right? And so the stat distribution of your archer march, let's say you're only running one archer march, well, the actual stats of that army are fluctuating as you swap in new commanders for old commanders, right? And so in that case, we may find ourselves in certain situations where it's like, okay, if you run Emperor Chin with Shajar or something like that, right? Well, okay, now you've got a ton of health, and so maybe you do want to optimize for more attack, right? And so there are like certain ways where if you're running very specific pairs or as new commanders come out, you might be able to look and do the math and pull out the spreadsheets and say, oh, actually the new meta changed, and like that's fair and it's fun to speculate, and it's very important, especially for Rally Garrison. But as open field players, we can't be so reactive to the new equipment meta, right? Because it is extremely expensive to change your legendary gear, because as you guys know, there is a penalty to dismantling this equipment, right? And oftentimes when we see a new meta for equipment, what that really means is it's 2% better, right? Which in the open field you will never notice. Like straight up, you actually will not notice that, right? You may notice it in Rally Garrison, especially for passes and things like that, but you're not going to notice it in the field almost ever, right? And so is it worth it to dismantle, like, oh, the Hope Cloak, it's no longer meta because there's so much defense now because of crystal tech, so we have to dismantle Hope Cloak and build it? That's stupid. That I'm just gonna flat out say, like, that is just dumb. That is something that you should think about if you're spending 6 figures on Rise of Kingdoms or more, like 50 grand a year maybe. Like that is like super well territory. Your average player never has to think about that. Like, it's cool to know, like, oh yeah, the meta changed slightly, but like functionally we can't actually do anything about that. You're not actually going to be dismantling stuff to build the new things, right? Unless you're that giga whale. So I just want you guys to know that, and I've sort of proven that in multiple like guide videos where we've talked about different equipment sets, and I've compared like 6 different sets immersive archer gear, and it's like, yeah, okay, this is clearly suboptimal, but like it actually doesn't even matter, right? Like even if I was like, okay, I'm gonna dismantle the weapon and build a KVK one, or maybe I'll save the weapon and put it on another set and build the KVK one, and like then we'll move the gloves over to another army, and then we'll build the leadership gloves. It's like I'm doing all that work and spending all those materials and all that gold and all those blueprints and all that time, and like what am I getting out of it? Like a 1%, 3% improvement. It's like it is so marginal that it's really not worth it. It's more worth it to just start building another set, right? For me, it would be I'd be better off just building another archer set. I'd be better off just building another set of calves or infantry or whatever, or like working on a siege army. Like there's just the opportunity cost is just so insanely high that like you have to have already 7 sets of gear with special talents and not much else to improve to then go back and start thinking about, okay, should I change these pieces? And then once you do that and they release a new commander with different stats, well then great news, you're gonna wish you had the old piece back again, right? And so like it's just all hypothetical. It's not really worth taking it that seriously, and I wanted to mention that here because I know there might be some questions about some tiny micro optimizations here or there, but you always have to keep in mind that like this stuff is very hard to change compared to other things in the game, especially like you could reroll armaments, you can swap out commanders, but gear is much harder to change. Okay, now let's talk about accessories, and accessories are always a very hot topic when it comes to guides, right? Accessories, you know, because they are more so special effects on the battlefield or more so damage amplifiers, like in the case of Greatest Glory or like Ring of Doom, for example, a lot of hype is always around accessories because it's not as straightforward, right? Like really, if you think about it, when it comes to, you know, your actual equipment, it's like, okay, what do I put on my infantry? Well, pick the one that has the most infantry stats, right? Like I know there's a little bit more nuance than that, but at least even for a beginner, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like when you're looking at like, okay, well, for cavalry, I'm going to pick the cavalry one, and then I'm going to upgrade to this cavalry one. Like it makes sense, right? But accessories, I feel like this is where people look for a lot of guidance, and I'm here to tell you guys that I know these look really fancy, right? A lot of these descriptions look really fancy, they sound really powerful because they are, but at the end of the day, accessories should be kind of the last thing that you really try to optimize for, and that's because accessories are super expensive and some of them really only move the needle a little bit. Really what matters a lot is showing up to the battlefield with as many stats as you can, because if you're losing the stat battle to your enemy, you're just going to lose the engagement, right? Like if you're running all purple pieces and then a ring and a horn, it's like you're gonna get demolished. The ring and horn will not save you, it will not move the needle, and they are extremely expensive. Look at the cost of these things, right? It's actually crazy. So what you really want to prioritize for is get your legendary set pieces, get your legendary gear for your helmet, your chest, your gloves, your legs, your boots, get the most amount of stats possible, because now you're on a level playing field for the most part. I know whales are going to have more special talents and maybe more iconic levels, but that's kind of the bare minimum, right? If you don't have the stats to show up to the battle, it doesn't matter that you're getting 50% all damage once every 10 seconds, right? Like it doesn't matter because you're already dead. Same thing with the Horn of Fury. Every 3 turns you're getting extra rage. Okay, well, great news, you're actually routed back to your city because you already died because you have all purple gear, right? So I just want to kind of set that expectation where like you should, when you think of accessories, kind of bring down the anxiety a little bit. Try not to think about like, oh, I have to micromanage and min-max every possible aspect of my, like, leave that to the whales, right? Leave that to the rally leaders, leave that to the garrison leaders, because at the end of the day, the accessories are like the final piece of the puzzle. It's not the most important part. It is important, but it's not the top priority. Okay, so try not to stress about accessories too much, especially because we have things like the Silent Trial, the Ancient Stratagems, and the Hall of the Loyal in the game, and these 3 accessories are actually very good budget builds for most players as they're making their progress through all of the other important pieces of equipment. Okay, Hall of the Loyal is a blue piece that gives you universal march speed. This is fantastic, especially for infantry and archers. Really good stuff, very cheap. It really helps you get in and out of battle. It is honestly underrated. I feel like Hall of the Loyal is underrated in 2026. On top of that, we have the Ancient Stratagems, which is troop capacity. Now this is deceptively good. Troop capacity is literally damage. The more troops you have in your army, the more damage you will deal. Now also, the more troops you have, the more troops you can send to the hospital, so it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, whereas like some of the legendary pieces are all upside, right? So this is a little bit of upside and a little bit of downside, but at the end of the day, Ancient Stratagems will help you hit harder. Okay, so this is a very nice flat bump to any army that you slap this on. And then finally, Silent Trial is a really good debuff. I mean, you take 13 rage from your target every single turn. Hello, slap that on some combo damage calves and you are melting away your enemy's rage. This is really, again, underrated. Okay, I know there's a lot of hype around all the legendary accessories accessories, and I think that makes these purple pieces very underrated. Okay, so don't sleep on these, especially because when you dismantle them, you get back all of the materials, and refining them only costs blueprints. Unlike with the legendary pieces, you also need to use materials. Okay, so do not feel bad about running purples in your accessory slots for quite a while. That being said, okay, that's kind of a disclaimer. Let's talk about the best accessories in the game right now. Okay, and again, we are talking about open field PvP. All right, so the newest pieces for the accessory slots are the Hero's Hilt and the Saddle of 1,000 Blessings, and unfortunately for open field PvP, these kind of ramp their damage a bit too slow. Even in the case of, you know, with Cavalry and they're dealing combo damage, you would think that this ramps really fast, and it unfortunately it doesn't ramp as fast as you would want it to when you compare it to things like the Ring of Doom or like the Greatest Glory, or even things like Horn of Fury is a really good damage amplifier in that it increases the frequency with which you cast your active skills. Okay, so really when we're talking about open field PvP, the choices are pretty clear. I would say if you are only running 5 armies or less, you kind of don't even have to think too hard about this, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but if you're only running 5 armies, I feel like almost every single army should have a Horn of Fury, right? I mean, there is basically no downside to this. It is literally just casting your active skills faster. That's it. Now, if we talk about somebody like Emperor Qin, for example, then okay, yeah, he might not need the Horn of Fury depending on who you're pairing him with and depending on what talents you've picked. If you guys want more information about Emperor Qin specifically, check out my videos covering him. Okay, but for everybody else, having a Horn of Fury is just objectively all upside. This is fantastic. You get a ton of rage and you're going to cast your active skills more frequently, which is going to increase the amount of damage that you deal. A majority of damage that you deal in Rise of Kingdoms in the end game comes from active skills. Okay, then we have to take a look at the Ring of Doom and compare that to the Greatest Glory or the Pendant of Eternal Night. Okay, now in this instance, let's start with the Ring versus the Greatest Glory, because this debate is held by both infantry and cavalry, and the answer to this is actually pretty straightforward. Let me pull up the math, because I think once you lay out the numbers, it really helps you figure out which one is better. Okay, so let's just take a look and remind ourselves, what does Ring of Doom do? It says whenever you launch a basic attack, it has a 10% chance to gain a 50% bonus to damage dealt for 2 seconds. However, it can trigger up to 1 time every 5 seconds. Okay, so we have a cooldown built in and a proc chance. When we compare this to the Greatest Glory, the Greatest Glory increases the normal damage you deal of all types by 5%. So this is consistent. There's no RNG, but of course you're comparing 5% to 50%. We've got to do the math to see how that works out. Okay, now here's the thing about Greatest Glory in 2026. Now that we have smite damage and combo damage in the game and on multiple armies, you can run this on either infantry or on cavalry, because infantry deals smite damage, and so Greatest Glory not only increases the damage you deal every turn, right, your white numbers that show up on the battlefield, but it also is a 5% increase to your smite damage that you deal, right? Because smite damage based on normal damage dealt, not skill damage. Okay, same thing with combo. This will increase your white numbers for cavalry and then also increase the combo attack damage you deal, because that is based on normal damage as well instead of skill damage. Okay, so how does the math actually work out between these two? All right, so let's take a look at the spreadsheet here. We have a 100% proc chance for the Greatest Glory because there's just no randomness here. It's always working. You're always getting that 5%. So on average, how many turns have to pass before you will see a proc of the Ring of Doom? Well, it's 10, right? Because it is a 10% chance. So 1 in every 10 turns, you're going to see the Ring of Doom proc on average. Okay, now I know that that changes with cavalry. We'll talk about that in a second, because combo attacks are bonus chances to proc, right? But on average, once every 10 turns, you're going to get that. But it's not that simple, because there is a cooldown, right? We have a 5-second cooldown on the Ring of Doom as well. And so really you have a 15-second cycle, because it's going to take on average 10 turns to get there, and then when you proc it, you get the bonus for 2 turns, but it won't proc for that 5-turn window. Okay, so we have a 2-turn buff window, and then the buff uptime is about 13%. Okay, now these numbers will change a little bit depending on, frankly, I don't remember if the actual turn it procs counts as 1 turn towards the cooldown. If that is true, then we just change this to 4, and I'll go over that in just a second, because that does change the numbers a little bit, but it actually doesn't change the outcome, so it's not even really worth arguing over that. But now that we have the uptime, right, so this is the percentage of time that we have the damage bonus, you can literally just multiply these together in order to find out the average damage, right? And that's your answer. So if you have a 50% damage bonus for every 2 out of 15 turns, right, that's 13%, then your average damage bonus from your Ring of Doom is 6.67%. Okay, now Now, as I said before, I don't actually remember off the top of my head if the cooldown begins the turn that it procs or if it starts the turn after, but let's say best case scenario, it starts the turn it procs. Now your average damage is actually higher. And then in the case of cavalry, like I said before, the average number of turns that it will take to proc your Ring of Doom actually comes down because of the combo attacks. And this will change depending on which commander pairing you're running, right? So for example, some cavalry commanders have bonus combo attacks built into their kit. Some other cavalry commanders only have combo attacks on their active skill, which is actually a pretty much a regular interval of increased probability. So it will change a little bit, right? But as this number comes down, right? So let's say it's every 9 turns, you'll see the average damage bonus goes up, right? Same thing here. If this is 8 turns, you'll see the average damage bonus goes up as well. If you're proccing this every 6 turns, which is very unlikely, you'll see that your average damage goes up tremendously, right? But what you'll notice is that no matter what we do to change the cooldown or the number of turns before proccing, the average damage bonus you get from the Ring of Doom is always higher than the Greatest Glory, right? Even if the cooldown is 7 seconds, you still have more damage on average from the Ring of Doom. Now, the only downside to the Ring of Doom is that this is RNG, right? There is randomness to the amount that the Ring of Doom procs. And so we have to think about, okay, well, on average, what is the break even, right? How many turns on average will you have to go through before there's a higher likelihood than not that your Ring of Doom has procced, right? And that break even is actually turn 7. Turn 7 is when it is more likely than not that your Ring of Doom will have procced given the numbers that we have here. Okay, so this is kind of like worst case scenario. All right, worst case scenario, it takes on average 7 turns for your Ring of Doom to deal more damage on average than your Greatest Glory. Now again, that's gonna fluctuate because this is RNG, so sometimes you'll get really lucky, sometimes you'll get really awful luck and it just won't proc ever, and then GG, right? That's the name of the game. There's RNG baked into everything in Rise of Kingdoms, so it's hard to control for that. But on an even playing field, you're gonna find that on average the Ring of Doom is a slightly superior piece, unfortunately. And I say that because I do have a Greatest Glory on my account. So that being said, if you do have a Greatest Glory, I would put it on your infantry. The reason for that is because, like I said, your cavalry have combo damage. They're going to proc the Ring of Doom even more. So this number, the gap is going to increase for cavalry. So Cavs have a little bit of an advantage there with the Ring of Doom. And the same is also true if we're looking at the special talents, right? The special talent bumps this up to 65%, but it keeps the proc chance the same. And we have 6.5% for the Greatest Glory. So again, we end up with the same outcome here. Okay. Now there is something to be said about the Greatest Glory when it comes to being swarmed down. And I guess this kind of leans more into like Rally Garrison. But the thing about normal damage is that it does increase the amount of counterattack damage you're dealing to the enemies that are swarming you. Okay. Now, same thing with Ring of Doom. This is a 50% bonus to damage dealt. Okay. So that means anyone hitting you is going to take more damage for those 2 seconds. But the thing about being swarmed down is it happens really fast and the proc chance doesn't increase for the Ring of Doom, right? Because this is basic attacks dealt, whereas this is always working, right? And so in the scenario where you're getting swarmed down, you probably want less RNG rather than more RNG, because again, you're not going to last that long. You're going to die sooner than later. And so the uptime of your Ring of Doom might be worse than you expect, and that's going to lead to a really bad trade. Whereas the average and consistency of Greatest Glory is going to help there because it literally always works every single turn, whether it procs or not, it's always working. So there is an advantage to the Greatest Glory in that scenario. Okay. Now there's 2 other things that I want to touch on with the Greatest Glory. The first is that if you are using a March to Cheeseburger, which is the practice of jumping out of your city just to hit a target until your active skill pops and then you run away, okay, or until that target realizes they're getting hit and then they hit you back, the Greatest Glory may often outperform there because again, you're not relying on RNG, and if you are only connected for, let's say, 5 or 6 seconds, 5 or 6 turns, then it's more likely than not that your Ring of Doom will have not procced in that time, right? So for really short micro engagements, the Greatest Glory is actually better. And the other thing that I want to mention about the Greatest Glory is that because there's no RNG involved, it will always work for your active skills, right? And I think that's actually a very important distinction, because even though on average the all damage boost from Ring of Doom is better than the Greatest Glory, the thing is, if you really want this to work for your active skills, like for smite damage or combo damage, this buff has to be active on the same turn as your active skills firing, right, or dealing damage. And because it's only up for 2 seconds, the probability that the 2 seconds it's up are also the 2 seconds that your active skill of either your primary or your secondary casts, it's never going to be both, right, because it's only 2 seconds. That's a pretty low probability, unfortunately. Whereas with the Greatest Glory, this will will always give you a 5% bonus to your primary and your secondary's active skill. So that is definitely a distinction worth mentioning here. And so all of that to say that even though the math works out in favor for the Ring of Doom, there's definitely still advantages to the greatest glory. Okay, so all of that being said, what are the best accessories in Rise of Kingdoms? Okay, well, if we're talking about open field fighting, really you can't go wrong with the Ring and Horn for most armies, right? Again, if you're running 5 armies or less, the Ring and Horn is kind of a no-brainer because on average you get the most damage increase, and the Horn of Fury makes sure that you're popping your active skills as much as possible. Okay, now I mentioned earlier the Pendant of the Eternal Knights, and this is a piece that you might consider getting for your Emperor Qin, because again, Emperor Qin doesn't necessarily need the Horn of Fury, and so that kind of frees up a slot, and so you could run like the ring and the pendant for maximum damage output, and that would be really good. The only problem with that is I don't typically like to advise players to craft gear specifically for one commander, because eventually they might not be part of the meta, and if they are not part of the meta, then you're stuck with this piece of legendary gear that you don't know what to do with, right? It's suboptimal. You'll have to put it somewhere, right? And like skill damage will always be relevant for archers, hopefully, and so you'll always have somewhere to put this. But again, you'll start to compare this to the Ring of Doom damage output, and you're always going to want the Ring of Doom over that when we're talking about archers, because archers, this doesn't increase their white numbers every single turn, right? Whereas like Greatest Glory does do that for Cavs and infantry. Okay, so it's the same comparison but a little bit worse. It just so happens to be that it would, for Emperor Qin, it would be replacing the Horn of Fury instead of the Ring of Doom, right? And so you would be running these two for Emperor Qin. I think that works, but again, I don't want to point you guys in the direction of crafting gear for one specific commander, because that's just too risky. It's just too expensive here with the amount of materials it costs, and we don't know if it's future proof, right? Hopefully it is, but we don't know for sure. And then really kind of the only other piece of equipment we can talk about is the Karoks war drums, and this is a piece of equipment that kind of had like a lot of hype around it for a brief moment in time when people were really trying to like maximize like the amount of damage they deal from their active skills, and I think there's something to be said about that. But again, when we're looking at the war drums versus the Horn of Fury, on average you're going to be getting more benefit out of the Horn of Fury than the Karoks war drums for you specifically. Okay, now the difference there is when you have an entire army of players that have a war drum, now you're starting to like AoE buff your allies, and that helps tremendously. But again, that is kind of a super high-end strategy for really strong kingdoms that have kind of planned around that. And I personally, for most players, like your average player that's only running 3, 4, 5 lineups, like I don't think you have to worry too much about that distinction, because again, on average the Horn of Fury is going to outperform, right? And why is that? I mean, the war drums occur less frequently, they also have a cooldown, so objectively they're going to happen much less, and some of that rage goes to nearby allied troops, and if you don't have a nearby allied troop, well then you've got bigger problems, frankly. But if you are a little bit out of position, for example, maybe you actually miss a nearby ally, so just by default I would say Horn of Fury is your better option on average. But for players that are running 6 or 7 armies, then you may consider looking into at least running 1 war drums on your entire lineup, because there's a good chance that at least one of your armies is going to be performing a lot worse than everything else anyway, and so it might as well buff the things that are dealing more damage, right? But again, that's a micro optimization for a lot of people. The last thing I'll talk about here is if you are going to run the war drums, you probably want to put this on your cavalry, because combo attack damage just increases the probability or the number of chances you have to proc the war drums, so it will proc more on calves than anything else. So I did just want to mention that. But again, if we want to keep it super simple, you kind of can't go wrong with the Ring and Horn, right? I know that's kind of boring, that's been the case for many years now, but unfortunately, like it really is kind of that simple when it's just you're trying to maximize damage output. For most commander pairs, this is the play. And also these pieces benefit from the fact that they are universal in that you can move them to any troop type, right? So again, Pendant is kind of locked to Emperor Qin, or at the very least it's locked to skill damage, whereas the Horn is like, okay, you need rage, well everybody needs rage. Okay, you want more all damage, okay, everyone needs all damage, right? That's kind of how this works. And so they're not only are they often the best possible things you can run anyway, but they also are universal, and you can move them to like, okay, well my best army is right now it's my infantry with my Sun Tzu and Bai Chi, but then later down the line, let's say new archers come out and like, oh, all of a sudden we need to actually run the Horn on Emperor Qin for whatever reason, then okay, well now we just move that over to Emperor Qin, and now we've got the best of the best on that that commander pair, and that's kind of it. Anyway guys, that's gonna do it for this video. I know this video was a bit longer than I expected, but I really wanted to cover everything and kind of bring you guys up to speed with what I'm feeling for the best sets of gear for all the troop types and my 2 cents on accessories right now in 2026. If you guys made it to the end of the video, please consider dropping a thumbs up on it. It really does help out the channel a ton. If you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel. A lot of you guys might think you're subbed because you've seen it on my videos, but you're actually not. Double check down below. With that being said guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.